Lin, the industrial city of Sin, and the industrial city of Law, which are important functions concerning the estimate for the horoscope goers who, having engaged in the function, looking up the Atun Shea films when seeing the specific video for when half of Americans had no rights, is a necessary reference concerning the plans in their defamation scheme from their poison script, from their abuse theater, which then materializes the function of the Confederates and the white supremacists' retaliation against the Americans, targeting the projected elites of the United States, requiring David to have proper representation, which step one requires them to sue Congress for David's right to pursue the remedy, as David is restrained and gagged and incapable under the censorship of doing so, which then would require them to remove all of the obstructions to that function, such as their war of attrition, in order to exhaust all of his speech, and money is speech, in order to prevent the function of the systems that create that speech, the sober, educated faculties, under the contracts from these obstructed contracts, which then materialize the function of the contracts of his education, which, being obstructed, do not have representation, as the function of not having representation is the opposite of him being represented. He was never represented a single time, at which point all of the continuation materializes into these immediate obligations, which also has in the secret record the function of the observation of the records in the secret dealings, materializes the various orders, such as Laura Bailey's game, which is her seeking to role-play an imagination version of their thing, where she would express the motive of the various things in order to materialize her best possible outcome, uh, which is ultimately an investigation for the Confederates, which is irrelevant, as the Confederates already had control over her jurisdiction, similar to the function of the Revenge X in the construction of the War on David channels, as the Revenge X and her supporting company, a female Gnosticis of Revenge X's, projected the future under a looking glass type program where they scry the position, which tells them the thing that they don't want to see, in which case they are led through a system of traps which then systematically guarantee the outcome that they were specifically trying to avoid, materializing their own thing, at which point, whenever you use the Confederate system, the further you try and escape and run away from the thing, the more you run into the trap and become subject to that thing, in which case it becomes a fool's errand in order to pretend to be smart when dealing with the white trash hillbilly Confederate rebellion, at which point this insurrectionist function includes the systematic strategy of the stunned effect in various games, which then generates the position of the inability by shocking or other mechanisms to prevent the body, which is fully restrained, from being able to move or act, at which point the shocking overrides the nerve system, which prevents the function, at which point voice alterations and muscle compulsions become automated under their control, at which point they, having radio control like in a video game controller or an RC controller or an airplane controller, like an Xbox controller or something along these lines, a PlayStation 4 controller, these types of things, that has control over the target, which then they engage with, and this will also normally include the function of a headset, which will include their capability of having a screen, probably some kind of Apple eyeglass screen, or maybe even a television, and that headset will actively have access to a microphone, allowing them to use it as a radio in order to mute the target and then to speak instead of it. Now, when you're dealing with a radio, when one party holds down the button in order to speak with it, the other side is muted. The other side cannot speak. That's how radios work. At which point, this is actively a part of those exchanges in order to engage in the function of various embarrassments and harassments and subversions, playing the evil stick of gum where they mimic the target in order to express themselves, creating the function of the various subversions, such as the Revenge X channels, in order to get the voice of the target, which then facilitates the capability of mimicking him, which then allows them to send the signal to other people that then perceive the function of whatever fraudulent script that has nothing to do with him. Now, while he's restrained, they do all of the other things, and because he's restrained and overpowered, he can't stop them from doing whatever they're going to do. At which point, the function of them doing those things materializes all of the injuries, such as David's absence allowing for 9/11, or David's absence allowing for the mass killing of the residents inside the Palestinian area, or the war in Ukraine, or any of the other international issues that they specifically objected he would have solved. Take, for instance, the function of their taking money off the top from the elites as they steal from the various countries, or do election subversions, which gives them positions of power without having to have public support, allowing them to do various extortions and abuses, which gives them extraordinary power and money as a parasite function, as an extension, as a mind flare virus expanded from the extension of the white supremacist Confederacy, seeking the overthrow of the United States, having deep-seated roots inside of the United States government in its subversion of the American government and its national security. These abuses generate a functional slave system, in which case the function of the fake experiments allows for the infinite variation of the abuses and subversions and censorships, etc., as they contract the Klan, as they hyper-concentrate all of the federal powers into the president and then decentralize it into its terrorists, otherwise known as the KKK, its various denominations engaging the spread of mayhem and havoc from their white supremacist hate crimes, materializing the function of the enforcement of the white supremacist communism, which includes the function of the purges of counter-revolutionaries or undesirables, including the function of the mass sterilization and abortion systems of the black community to prevent the function of their ability to reproduce. Quote, Ruth Bader Ginsburg on that, at which point the function of these various exchanges materializes into the construction of the Second Holocaust, which is a repeat of the original Holocaust ordered by the very same Confederacy, which had paid by bankrupting the United States stock market the Nazis in order to create, in which case its infinite reproduction is derived by the inability of the Americans to defeat it, creating a functional spirit naga of a creature that is defeated time and time again, and it keeps on resurrecting like some kind of Voldemort, which drinks the blood of unicorn for its degenerate face ruined, nose eradicated, snake-like appearance, which then materializes its construction of the image of the beast or the Rocco's Basilisk in its infinite pursuit of unlimited evil in the apocalypse, reminiscent of the Bible, in its revelation. The restraints from that function generates the exhaustion and starvation, which then materializes the murder. And it is, by definition, a murder, and that murder is derived by robbery, and all of the other subversions by the obstructions of the law and its protection of rights, as the purpose of the sovereign, which is the Constitution, is to defend the public from the government, and it being targeted by usurpers in a rebellion derives the function of no access to the capacity of national security, which is the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, which is the concentration of the sovereignty of all of the people who would be protected by it, who are being betrayed in this insurrection. As we dive deeper into the reflections and dive exponentially into the most unfathomable, abyssal depths of the Shadowfell, we materialize the function of the stripping away of every positive color and emotion, which then leaves one stripped bone dry, until the function of the possibility of any nutrients becomes unimaginably desirable, even to the point where you would have even a drop of water to quench the heat. So too, a drop of human decency could cure even the most minuscule amount of affliction, and while it would never do as any satisfactory solution, it becomes a state of absolute desperation. Or, in other words, an extortion in a racketeering operation, in order to derive the hyper potency and value for the fame and attention and wealth of those who've contracted the crimes to happen, creating the need for the thing to be supplemented, and the observation of it as a functional need for the human decency owed generates for everyone who is not in on the racketeering to actively have to supplement the thing according to the function until the restoration is appropriately consumed, at which point the function of their interest under the threat of the thing that created the problem in the first place requires them to reinforce the solution and the proper security and stop fucking around by suing the Congress for David's right to pursue the remedy. As these extortions are derived by the human trafficking and inability by the restraints, by definition, the removal of the restraints solves the lack of access to those essential resources, facilitating the reconstruction of the IP and its constructed faculties, which are essential to the sober control of the faculties, which generate the organized function of all of the reporting, materializing a sober educated answer, which is necessary to engage in the function of the legal activities with the government. The court does not accept anything that is not a sober, educated answer, and anything that is derived by anything else may not be submitted, and any reference to the time where someone has not chosen to be and is subject to those conditions may not be subject to inspection or questions by that court, which may not pursue those who do not understand, at which point the function of the roofies plus and the various poisons from their fake experiments derive the violation of the right to the person's security in their person, their papers, and their things. The body, having been restrained and abused, was not provided that security from the government, which is the point of the right, as well as doing so in order to gain access to the illegal collection of the data or the papers, which creates the functional position of the inability of the party to be able to engage in a strategy against the abusers who, gaining access, are misusing those levers, requiring a bit of privacy in order to conduct an appropriate strategy, in order to do a defense. And while they are perpetually harassed by this false hydra, and everyone systematically becomes disappeared and consumed and forgotten about, with this strange, eerie essence lingering in your mind that the thing vaguely happened and they don't vaguely grasp the function of exactly the thing that needs to be understood, but is this perpetual nagging sense that the thing exists and was important, but there is no way to have access to the information. as a functional objective of their sorcery, as they, having studied the function of all of the magics historically, have engaged in the various purges in those activities, including the function of their study of the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, where they engage in those extortions in order to get the parties that are most vulnerable by its existence in order to convert and subordinate themselves under a communist spell of struggling to capture, at which point the party, having been captured after the struggling, after their mind had been broken, accept the role of the new thing, becoming a part of it as their identity, materializing it into reality, speaking it into reality from that abuse, from those shattered minds, increasing as a converted militia of undead white trash to engage in the mindless consumption, and the horde, having pursued the function to this end, materializes the hunt and eradication of all life, as the undead perceive the thing of life itself as being a glaring irritant that must be extinguished, that they may return to their state of thoughtlessness and slumber. A dream within a dream, and stripped of all things that could have been considered joy, the only resolute benefit and luxury is the absence of consciousness itself.